by a backdoor. A backdoor is simply a program that gives us remote control over the system that it gets executed on. So it allows us to remotely execute system commands, access resources such as the storage, upload and download files and read them on the target system, see what they type on their keyboard, access their webcam, even access their desktop, and so much more. Basically, you'll be able to remotely do anything that a normal person can do on their computer once they execute your backdoor. So a backdoor is simply a program. It's simply an executable. But what makes it special is part of its code that we refer to as a payload. So the payload is the part of the code inside the backdoor, inside the executable, that allows us to remotely control that computer, execute system commands, access its resources, and so on. So the program that we're going to use to generate payloads is called MSF Venom, and I'm choosing to go with this program because it's kind of the industry standard to learn how to use MSF Venom. And then there is more advanced tools that modify the payloads generated by MSF Venom and make them bypass antivirus programs and do fancy stuff with it to allow you to bypass security and so on. But as an ethical hacker, and especially in this course, it is very important to learn how to use MSF Venom first before moving on to more advanced techniques, which I cover in my other courses, such as the social engineering course and the cloud course, where I show you how to use proper C2 frameworks to control the computers that you hacked from within the cloud. But before we can do that, it is very important to have a strong foundation in this topic, and that's why we're starting with MSF Venom. So if we actually just go ahead to Kali and type MSF Venom, followed by -- list to list all of the payloads that we can use. So like I said, MSF Venom is the program that we're going to use to generate our backdoors, and we're simply asking it to list all of the payloads that it has. And if I hit enter and give it a few seconds, because you'll see we're going to get a huge list of payloads, as you can see, there are so many payloads to pick from. And as you can see, the first part is the name of the payload, and the second part in here is a description of how this payload works. And obviously you can Google the name of the payload to learn more about it. But before we do all of that, I want to spend this lecture to explain to you the naming pattern that we have in here. Because as you can see, most of these payloads are made up of 3 parts, as you can see in here, separated by forward slashes. Now these parts, first of all, refer to the platform that the payload works on, the type of payload, and the communication channel or method that the payload is going to use in order to give you remote control over that computer. So an example would be Windows shell reverse HTTP. And as I said, the first part in here is the platform. So this specific payload is designed to work on Windows computers. Now, MSF Venom, as you saw earlier, has so many different payloads. So you've got Linux payloads, OS X, Apple iOS for iPads and iPhones. You've got Android payloads. The platform can also be a programming language, such as Python or Java. So payloads that start with Python or Java mean that they will work on any computer that is able to run Python code or Java, regardless of the operating system. It doesn't matter if it runs Windows, Linux, or Apple OS X. If you create a Python payload, it will work on any computer that has a Python interpreter, regardless of its operating system. And then we even have generic payloads that are designed without thinking about the operating system. They're designed to work in different scenarios and different operating system, regardless of that operating system. So that's the first part of the payload, the platform. Now the next part is the type of the payload. And in this example, it's shell. And what that means is that it's going to give you remote shell control, so you'll be able to do anything that you can do on that computer using its shell, using commands. Now again, there are so many other types than shell payloads. We have Meterpreter payloads, which are payloads specifically designed by the Metasploit team. They run in memory, they use encrypted communication, and they are designed to be modular and extendable, so they offer so many features. And these are actually the kind of payloads that we're going to use ourselves later on. You also have payloads designed to inject their code into other files, such as the DLL inject that injects itself into DLL files, and the PE that is designed to be injected into portable executable files. You got the VNC inject payloads that allow you to access the desktop of the computer that you've hacked. You even have very simple payloads that simply display a message box. And you might think that this is not useful, but it actually is. If you're just testing and trying to test an exploit, not a backdoor, you don't really want to hack the target computer. You just want to see if your exploit worked because you're running the code yourself. So a lot of the time you want to keep things simple and you want to go with a very simple payload that will simply display a message box. And if you see the message box, it means that you actually managed to exploit whatever vulnerability that you're trying to exploit. So the first part is the platform, and the second part is the type, and the third part of the payload name is the communication method or channel, like we said. And if you look closely, you can see that even this part is almost made out of two parts. So the first part is the direction of the connection, and I'll explain that to you in a second. And the second part is the protocol used in this connection. So when it comes to the direction, the most common types are going to be either bind or reverse. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. Let's say that you have two computers. This is you, the hacker, and this is the target computer. In a bind or a direct connection, when the backdoor is executed on the target computer, it opens up what we call a port. So you can think of this as if it's a socket on the wall. And then, as a hacker, you would go in whenever you want and connect to the socket using your plug. Now, the problem with this is opening a port in here at the target computer could potentially raise a lot of alarms. So if they have a firewall installed, it'll raise an alarm, and even when you connect to it, the connection is not a typical connection that a normal personal computer would do. However, if we go with a reverse connection, we do the reverse. So instead of opening a port at the target computer, we actually open a port in our own computer. Therefore, even if our firewall complains about this, we can disable the firewall because we are doing this ourselves and we know what we are doing. And then when we execute the backdoor at the target computer, the backdoor is going to connect from the target computer to our computer. So this connection is much less suspicious because, first of all, we're not opening any ports at the target computer, and connecting from the target computer to any other destination is very normal because even if a target goes ahead and loads a normal website, they are basically connecting to that website on port 80 or 8080. And this is exactly what we can do. We can actually open port 80 or 8080 so that this connection looks less suspicious, and even use a protocol that is used by web servers so that our connection seems like normal web traffic. So remember, we said the second part of the communication is a protocol. So when you load a website, you either load it over HTTP or HTTPS. So we can actually use a reverse connection on a port that websites use, which is port 80 or 8080, and set the protocol to HTTP or HTTPS. And that way, the connection is going to seem very similar to a connection that a computer would make when they load a website, thus allowing us to bypass many firewalls and security measurements. So this is a very common naming convention when it comes to payloads. We have the platform in the first part, the type of the payload in the second part, and the communication method in the last part. So let's just have a quick look at a few examples just to make sure that we understand this properly. So these are very common payloads that you might see or use yourself in many places. As you can see, the first three in here will only run on Windows as the platform. You can see the type in this one is shell, meterpreter, and meterpreter, and we explained what these are. And both of these are using reverse connection. This one is using the TCP protocol. This one is using the HTTP protocol. And this one is actually using a bind or a direct connection over the TCP protocol. Now, as mentioned earlier, there are payloads that would work on any computer as long as they have a specific programming language installed. So we have an example of a Python payload in here. So the platform here is Python. It's not an operating system because it will run on any operating system that has Python installed. Now, I also wanted to point out these two payloads in here, and as you can see, they don't follow the exact naming convention that we spoke about. You will see outliers in the payloads in there, because not all payloads can actually be used as backdoors, and you'll see that as you go through this course and maybe my other courses. But these payloads can actually be used as backdoors. But you can see in this one, the first two parts are actually referring to the platform. So it's an Apple OS X x64, not the ARM computers. And then the next part is actually the type. So it's not really separated with a forward slash. And then the last part is the communication method in here. Same with this Apple payload. So this is for Apple iOS and it's for ARM chips. So this one is for x64 chips, this one is for ARM chips. Again, the first two parts are referring to the platform, and then the next part is referring to the type, and the final part is referring to the communication. So sometimes the forward slashes could be a little bit misleading, but the order is always the same. The first part of the payload indicates the platform, the second part indicates the type of the payload, and the last part is the communication method. Now, we're actually going to probably be using only one or two types of payloads throughout the course, but like I said, this course is designed to teach you the basics of hacking, and it is very important to learn how to create your own backdoors and payloads using MSF Venom, and to do that, it's very important to understand the naming convention that the payloads use. And in the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to put this in practice, create a backdoor, and use it to hack a Windows computer.